The flickering neon sign of the corner bistro in downtown Cincinnati cast a sickly yellow glow on the rain-slicked sidewalk, perfectly mirroring the sudden, sinking dread that washed over Ethan Miller, 36, exhausted but sharply dressed in his only decent suit, a nervous energy palpable in his posture as he gripped a single, slightly wilted rose. He was there for a first date with Sarah, a woman he'd connected with over weeks of late-night texts, finally daring to hope for a new chapter after 6 years of relentless, all-consuming single fatherhood following a devastating loss that still haunted his nights. But the moment the restaurant door swung open, the expectation of a simple, adult evening shattered violently as he saw not one, but 4 figures approaching his table. Sarah, late 30s, stunningly beautiful with a deep sadness hidden behind her hurried smile, clutching an oversized, worn handbag, wasn't alone. Trailing behind her were 3 small children, ages 3, 5, and 7, wide-eyed, slightly disheveled, and clearly overwhelmed by the upscale environment. A silent, undeniable tsunami of immediate, life-altering complication that hit Ethan with the force of a physical blow, making his carefully constructed world wobble precariously. The mystery wasn't just why she brought them, but the deep, wordless terror he briefly glimpsed in her eyes as she scanned the street. A fleeting, profound fear that suggested this wasn't just a miscommunication about childcare, but a desperate, immediate plea for refuge, transforming his simple dinner reservation into an unpredictable and potentially dangerous commitment he was completely unprepared for. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a sickening drum solo of panic and confusion, as the 7-year-old girl, wearing a too-big coat and holding a faded, stuffed rabbit, whispered something to Sarah, and Sarah's facade cracked for a split second, revealing pure, unadulterated fear before she forced a brittle laugh and introduced the silent trio as if bringing them to a first date was the most natural thing in the world. A bizarre, unsettling beginning that signaled a life-altering complication beyond anything he could have possibly foreseen. Little did he know that this unexpected arrival was the starting gun for a race against an unseen, powerful enemy, and the rose in his hand felt less like a romantic gesture and more like a sacrificial offering to the unknown chaos that was about to consume his life. Ethan's life in his cramped, 2-bedroom apartment in the working-class neighborhood of Oakley, Cincinnati, had been a grueling, 7-day-a-week marathon defined by the punishing routine of factory shifts at Midwest Auto Parts, physically demanding 5 a.m. to 3 p.m. schedule, followed by the immediate transition to dad mode for his daughter, Chloe, 8, bright-eyed and resilient, the spitting image of her late mother, Lisa, whose memory was both Ethan's greatest strength and his deepest, most paralyzing wound. Every square inch of their modest home and every waking hour were meticulously calculated to keep their fragile, post-tragedy world from collapsing. He'd work the late-night secondary job, delivering pizzas for Luigi's. After Chloe was asleep, fueled by instant coffee and the gnawing guilt of not being enough, the silent pain of Lisa's sudden death in a tragic car accident 6 years prior never truly fading, manifesting as a persistent tremor in his hand when he was tired and an unshakable fear of unexpected phone calls. His financial situation was perpetually precarious, a constant, low-grade fever of anxiety. He was $12,000 in credit card debt just from covering medical bills and the funeral costs, and the $400 he had saved for a new transmission was the only cushion between them and total collapse. The only luxury he allowed himself was a weekly Saturday morning trip to the public library, a ritual to find new storybooks for Chloe and briefly escape the crushing weight of reality. And the decision to even attempt a first date with Sarah was a monumental, terrifying step outside his self-imposed emotional fortress. A small, desperate reach for normalcy that felt like a betrayal of Lisa's memory. The pressure was not just economic but emotional. Every morning, the sight of Chloe's innocent, trusting face in the harsh Ohio light was a visceral reminder of his absolute, non-negotiable responsibility. The silent vow he made at Lisa's graveside fueling his every exhaustive action. A burden of love and grief he carried on his broad but weary shoulders. But he had no idea this first, faltering step towards a new life would be the catalyst that would not only expose his vulnerabilities but also attract a threat far more sinister and organized than overdue utility bills, transforming his quiet struggle into a high-stakes battle he never signed up for. Over the next 3 agonizing weeks following the bizarre, multi-person first date, A creeping sense of paranoia began to replace Ethan's confusion, starting with small, almost dismissible anomalies that grew into a chilling pattern, suggesting that Sarah and her children, Liam, 7, Maya, 5, and Finn, 3, weren't just in a tight spot, but were actively running from something powerful and malevolent. It began with the unexpected, silent, late-night car parked down the street from his Oakley apartment, a black, unmarked sedan with tinted windows that appeared 3 nights in a row around 2 a.m. The driver always obscured, only to vanish before dawn, a presence that made the hair on the back of his neck prickle with primal fear. Then came the strange, muffled phone call he received on his work line at Midwest Auto Parts on a Tuesday morning at 10:47 a.m. A distorted voice simply said, "Stop asking questions, Mr. Miller." Before hanging up, the chilling brevity of the message striking him with nauseating precision, confirming his creeping suspicion that he was now involved in something far beyond a domestic issue. Sarah, who had become a fixture in their lives out of necessity, claiming a broken-down car and an eviction notice, accepting his offer of temporary shelter in his small living room with the children, was pathologically cautious, jumping violently at the sound of the doorbell, insisting all blinds remain perpetually drawn, and routinely wiping down her phone with a small antiseptic wipe, actions that spoke volumes of a fear deeper than mere financial hardship. Once, while she was frantically searching through her worn handbag, a small silver locket, engraved with the initials DAR, fell out, and before he could ask, she snatched it up with a fierce, almost violent protectiveness that was completely out of character for her gentle demeanor, and later, he found a crudely drawn map tucked inside the oldest boy's backpack, covered in what looked like children's scribbles but containing 3 distinct, circled addresses in distant states, a silent testament to a life of forced transience and fear. The cumulative effect of these unsettling details, the watchful car, the cryptic warning, the constant terror in Sarah's eyes, the secret map, served as undeniable, escalating signals that a storm was not merely brewing, but had already made landfall directly on his doorstep, transforming his safe haven into a temporary, exposed target. And little did he know that the initials on the locket held the key to a truth far more devastating than he could possibly imagine, connecting Sarah's sudden appearance to an international conspiracy. The escalating tension reached a breaking point on a frigid Saturday afternoon when Ethan, driving his beat-up 2008 Ford Focus, the only vehicle he owned and his lifeline, made a quick stop at the Kroger on Madison Road to pick up urgently needed milk for the children, leaving Sarah alone in the car with the kids for a mere 5 minutes, a decision he would instantly regret. As he stood in the dairy aisle, weighing the cost difference between whole milk and 2%, he felt an intense, unmistakable presence behind him, a cold weight of scrutiny that made his muscles tense involuntarily, and when he turned, he locked eyes with a man who was the physical embodiment of quiet danger. A tall, impeccably dressed individual, 50s, razor-sharp suit, silver hair, ice-blue eyes that held no warmth whatsoever, a faint, metallic scent of expensive cologne and power clinging to him, who radiated an aura of lethal, controlled menace. The man, without raising his voice above a chilling whisper, delivered a calculated, precise ultimatum while holding a carton of organic, free-range eggs as a prop. "Mr. Miller, you have something that belongs to me, a woman and her liabilities. They are not yours to keep. Return her by noon Monday, or the collateral you hold most dear will be exposed to the elements." The last phrase delivered with a cold, almost surgical emphasis that unmistakably referred to Chloe, his own innocent daughter, and the man's eyes flickered down to the tiny, hand-drawn picture of Chloe taped to Ethan's wallet, a detail he couldn't have known unless he had been watching them closely. The threat, delivered in the mundane setting of a brightly lit grocery store, was absolutely devastating, transforming Ethan's benevolent act into a mortal risk, a sudden, terrifying elevation of the stakes from a personal problem to a confrontation with a powerful, organized entity. Ethan, reeling from the raw audacity and the terrifying specificity of the threat, could only stammer a question about who he was, but the man simply adjusted his expensive silk tie and gave a thin, humorless smile, his final words echoing with lethal finality. "Call me the executor. I keep things clean," before he smoothly turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowded aisles, leaving Ethan paralyzed, his hands shaking so violently that the carton of milk he held slipped and splattered across the shiny linoleum floor, a mess that perfectly symbolized the sudden, irreversible chaos that had just spilled into his carefully contained life. What happened next would shock everyone, because Ethan, instead of fleeing, made a choice that would define the rest of his existence. The executor's chilling ultimatum echoed like a death knell in the small confines of Ethan's apartment, placing him on the horns of a monstrous moral dilemma. Surrender Sarah, a desperate, terrified woman and 3 innocent children, to an unknown, powerful evil, or risk the unimaginable, putting his own daughter, Chloe, directly in the crosshairs of a ruthless enemy. For 48 agonizing hours, Ethan wrestled with the decision, pacing the floor of his tiny kitchen, the smell of cheap takeout and stale anxiety filling the air, the image of Chloe's trusting smile battling against the silent, desperate pleas in Sarah's eyes, a war between his innate protective instincts and the overwhelming, terrifying reality of the threat. His logical mind screamed for him to call the police, but the specificity of the executor's threat, the knowledge of Chloe's existence and the chilling confidence in his delivery, convinced Ethan that this operation was too sophisticated for a simple police report, that turning to law enforcement might only escalate the danger. The decisive turning point came late Sunday night, as he watched Sarah gently tuck in her 3 children, who were sleeping on makeshift beds in his living room. And as she looked up, her face was etched with a raw, agonizing guilt and resignation, whispering the words, "You have to send us away, Ethan, he's serious." A plea of self-sacrifice that, paradoxically, strengthened his resolve. He realized that abandoning them would not only haunt him forever, but would make him no better than the monsters pursuing them, stripping away his own hard-won humanity. At that moment, everything started to change. The 6 years of self-pity and paralysis over Lisa's death suddenly channeled into a fierce, protective fire, a primal drive to save those who could not save themselves, and he made the impossible choice, gathering Sarah and the children and driving to a remote, rundown motel 50 miles outside of Cincinnati in Maysville, Kentucky, an act of defiant resistance that drained his entire $400 emergency savings. He left a cryptic, defiant note on his refrigerator, a subconscious marker of his new commitment: risk everything, protect them all. Little did he know that this act of kindness, driven by deep empathy and a desire for redemption, had just ignited a chain reaction that would immediately cost him his livelihood and expose him to far greater scrutiny, because the executor was always watching, and the motel was only a temporary, transparent reprieve. The immediate, brutal consequence of Ethan's impossible decision to harbor Sarah and the children struck with devastating speed the very next morning, transforming his precarious situation into a full-blown financial and professional crisis, the world he had so meticulously built beginning to violently crumble around him. When he arrived at the Midwest Auto Parts factory floor on Monday morning at 4:58 a.m., exhausted but resolute, ready to begin his shift, his supervisor, the callous and notoriously petty Frank Donnelly, 55, obese, perpetually chewing on a stale cigar, a man who saw kindness as weakness, was waiting for him at the time clock with a chillingly formal look on his face, holding a thick, manila envelope sealed with a company logo. Frank didn't mince words, citing a fabricated breach of company policy, gross misconduct due to unexplained absence and misuse of company property, a transparent reference to the few personal calls Ethan made from his desk phone to Sarah, and handed Ethan the termination papers, effective immediately, without severance and with only the final paycheck for the hours he had already worked, a check that amounted to a mere $320 after deductions. The injustice was staggering. 6 years of flawless, back-breaking loyalty, erased in under 2 minutes by a man who clearly took sadistic pleasure in the power, and the sudden loss of his primary income source, coupled with the $400 spent on the motel, plunged Ethan into immediate critical poverty. He had exactly $117.84 left in his checking account to feed 5 children and himself, with a mortgage payment of $1,250 due in 2 weeks. As Ethan stood in the factory parking lot, the freezing November rain starting to fall, a profound and paralyzing sense of failure washed over him, the physical reality of his situation. The bills, the empty pantry, Chloe's absolute dependence, combining with the emotional weight of being unjustly discarded, and he gripped the damp termination letter so hard the paper tore, a gesture of impotent rage. He felt the cold, hard certainty of the executor's pervasive reach. This wasn't coincidence, but a calculated, immediate punishment designed to apply maximum pressure, cutting off his financial life support to force his hand. The truth was far more devastating than he could imagine, because the executor had not only severed his employment, but had also anonymously tipped off Child Protective Services with a highly exaggerated and falsified report regarding the sudden, unsupervised appearance of 3 extra children in Ethan's already stressed household, ensuring that the next wave of the attack would be a direct, existential threat to his very right to be a father to Chloe. The psychological warfare escalated savagely 3 days later, orchestrated by the executor with surgical precision to ensure maximum emotional damage and social isolation, striking Ethan at the place where he felt the safest and most validated: Chloe's elementary school, a place usually full of small joys and community connection, transforming it into a scene of devastating public humiliation. It was the annual parent-teacher meet and greet at Hyde Park Elementary, a mandatory event Ethan had specifically taken a second job off shift to attend, and as he was proudly discussing Chloe's excellent progress in math with her teacher, Mrs. Jenkins, 50s, kind-faced, professional, a sudden commotion erupted near the front entrance of the auditorium. 2 stern-faced individuals, a man and a woman in plain, dark suits, carrying official-looking clipboards from the Hamilton County Child Protective Services, CPS, strode confidently toward him, drawing the attention of nearly every parent and teacher present, their approach silencing the bustling room instantly. The female agent, a cold, unyielding woman named Agent Reyes, produced an official court summons and, in a loud, deliberate voice that carried across the hushed audience, accused Ethan of creating an unstable, unsafe, and unsanitary home environment, referencing the fabricated anonymous tip that detailed unregistered minor dependence and financial neglect, all the while detailing his recent termination from Midwest Auto Parts with chilling accuracy. The public shaming was unbearable. Dozens of parents turned to stare, their expressions a mixture of pity, judgment, and outright disgust, effectively painting him as an unfit, irresponsible father in the eyes of his entire community. A character assassination that left him stammering and weak with shock, his face burning crimson. The humiliation peaked when Agent Reyes served him with an emergency order to appear in family court within 72 hours, threatening an immediate temporary removal of Chloe if he failed to comply or if they found any evidence of Sarah and her children on his property. A direct, undeniable assault on his foundational identity as Chloe's protector. He saw Mrs. Jenkins's face, etched with a look of profound disappointment and mandatory professional caution, and realized the subtle, immediate social ostracization had begun, the poison of the executor's lies spreading rapidly through the social network of the school, severing his community ties. Little did he know that this staged confrontation was not merely a threat, but a calculated maneuver designed to force him to bring Sarah out of hiding and into the jurisdiction of the court system, making her and the evidence she carried easy targets for the next, more brutal phase of the plan. Just as Ethan stood shell-shocked in the school hallway, the CPS agents preparing to leave and the hostile silence of the gathered parents pressing down on him, a completely unexpected and highly confusing element entered the fray, adding a profound layer of mystery and complexity to the already devastating public spectacle. A striking, impeccably dressed woman, 40s, sharp navy blue power suit, expensive Italian leather briefcase, hair pulled back into a severe but elegant bun, radiating an almost palpable aura of high-stakes legal power, suddenly materialized from the crowd, her presence immediately commanding attention with an almost theatrical silence. She was the antithesis of the downtrodden, worried parents. This woman, who introduced herself simply as Eleanor Vance, legal counsel, approached Agent Reyes and the male CPS agent with breathtaking confidence, and before they could object, she slammed a thick, official-looking document onto the female agent's clipboard. A highly sophisticated, last-minute temporary restraining order against the CPS action, citing multiple procedural errors and constitutional rights violations, all filed electronically only minutes before. Eleanor spoke with a clipped, authoritative tone, her voice devoid of emotion but thick with legal authority, calmly dismantling the CPS agent's case in front of the assembled parents and teachers, citing obscure sections of the Ohio Revised Code and demanding they vacate the premises immediately or face a contempt charge, a level of legal firepower that was completely out of character for a simple, working-class custody case. Ethan was utterly bewildered. He had never seen this woman before, had not hired an attorney, and certainly couldn't afford one of this caliber. Yet she was fighting for him with ferocious, professional intensity, her presence a sudden, inexplicable shield against the public onslaught. The confusion exploded when Agent Reyes, visibly frustrated but legally bound, whispered to Ethan a cryptic warning as she was leaving. "We'll be back, and she knows more than she's saying," nodding subtly toward Eleanor. Ethan tried to ask Eleanor who she was and who had hired her, but she simply gave him a piercing, unreadable look, handed him a business card with a single, untraceable phone number, and stated only, "Someone who believes in justice. Don't contact me unless it's absolutely necessary, and never mention this to Sarah. She is the key," before she turned on her heel and disappeared as swiftly as she arrived, leaving Ethan with a lifeline he couldn't trust and a profound new question about the forces arrayed for and against him. Little did he know that Eleanor Vance was not just a lawyer, but a deep-cover operative whose appearance was the result of a desperate, last-minute plea from a high-powered, unknown entity who was now secretly watching his every move, ready to intervene again, transforming his personal drama into a covert operation. The sudden, inexplicable legal reprieve provided by the mysterious Eleanor Vance gave Ethan only a fleeting moment of relief before the central conflict took a stunning, terrifying twist, immediately eclipsing the CPS threat and introducing a new, far more immediate danger that emerged from a completely unexpected source. While Sarah, who Ethan had brought back to the apartment, banking on Eleanor's temporary legal cover, was nervously scrolling through old photos on her laptop, desperately trying to find an official document that might explain her frantic situation, she suddenly let out a strangled cry, her face draining of all color as she stared at the screen, her terror now raw and undisguised. The unexpected twist was a chilling image that had been silently loaded onto her desktop. A recent, high-resolution surveillance photo of the executor standing on a rooftop across the street from the very motel in Maysville where Ethan had temporarily hidden them, casually smoking a cigarette and looking directly into the camera, a clear message that their initial escape had been a transparent illusion and that every move was monitored. But the new threat that emerged was far more immediate and personal. An anonymous email had just landed in Sarah's inbox, sent via a heavily encrypted Swiss server, not from the executor, but from a separate, highly aggressive entity who introduced himself only as the broker. And the message contained a high-resolution, time-stamped photograph of Chloe leaving her school that very afternoon, the accompanying text short, chilling, and specific. "The collateral is now active. I'm not interested in your secrets, only in the diamond. Hand over the locket, or your daughter will meet with an unfortunate, permanent accident before sunrise." This wasn't the slow, calculated pressure of the executor. The broker was a direct, mercenary threat, focused on an immediate, physical transaction, confirming that Sarah's silver locket, the one engraved with DR, was not a sentimental object but a valuable target, suggesting a far wider network of criminals was involved. The confusion exploded as Ethan realized he was now fighting a two-front war. The strategic, legally manipulative power of the executor, and the brutal, immediate violence of the broker, both focused on the locket and both placing Chloe in mortal peril. The truth was far more devastating than he could imagine. The locket contained micro-engraved coordinates and a decryption key to a stolen, multi-million-dollar data set, a secret that had inadvertently drawn the attention of two completely separate, equally ruthless organizations, and Ethan's simple life was now the battleground for a fortune, and his daughter was the pawn. The overwhelming pressure from the broker and the executor quickly converged, resulting in a second, devastating blow that went beyond financial ruin, gutting Ethan of his legal rights and severing his most vital emotional connection. A stunning injustice that left him nearly empty-handed and on the verge of total collapse. Leveraging the initial, successful CPS filing, which Eleanor Vance could only temporarily delay, not permanently stop, the executor's vast network executed a stunningly effective, multi-pronged legal maneuver designed to isolate Ethan completely. First, a secret petition was filed in an obscure district court in downtown Cincinnati by an anonymous, high-powered law firm, later revealed to be a shell company for the executor, claiming a debt of $250,000 against Ethan for a fictitious breach of a private, non-disclosure agreement related to confidential company intellectual property. This fabricated, high-stakes lawsuit immediately resulted in an ex parte order to freeze all of Ethan's remaining financial assets and place an immediate lien on his only property, the Oakley apartment, making him technically insolvent and legally barred from accessing the last $117.84 he possessed. The second, more brutal injustice came 2 days later when the CPS, having corrected their initial procedural errors, returned with a valid, court-sanctioned emergency temporary custody order, citing the financial destitution and the presence of unregistered, potentially trafficked children, a deliberate, slanderous lie designed to evoke maximum fear, as grounds for immediate removal. The scene was heartbreaking and deeply unjust. 2 uniformed police officers accompanied the CPS agents, and in front of a weeping, terrified Chloe, they executed the order, prying her away from her father's desperate embrace, the devastating injustice amplified by the sight of Chloe's small hand reaching for him as she was led away, her innocent confusion a visceral wound to Ethan's soul. He was left alone in the apartment, legally bankrupt, officially deemed an unfit father, his home now under judicial scrutiny, Sarah and her children having fled moments before the CPS arrived to save them from a potentially worse fate, and he was completely and utterly isolated, stripped of his daughter, his money, and his community respect in less than a week, a calculated, crushing move by an unseen enemy. At that moment, the depth of the injustice settled in his stomach like a cold stone. He had lost almost everything simply for the crime of showing humanity, and he realized the fight was no longer about saving Sarah, but about reclaiming his daughter and his fundamental right to existence. The loss of Chloe, the sudden, violent vacuum where her laughter and presence used to be, sent Ethan plummeting into a profound, suffocating darkness, marking his absolute lowest point, a moment of paralyzing despair where the option of simply giving up became a tangible, seductive weight. He wandered his now silent apartment, the emptiness of the small rooms amplifying the hollowness in his chest, his hands passing over Chloe's toys, a well-loved, slightly chipped ceramic tea set, a stack of colorful drawing books, each object a sharp, brutal shard of the life he had lost, the silence of the space where 5 children had briefly lived now ringing with the sound of his own defeat. For 48 continuous hours, he barely moved, not eating, not sleeping, sitting on the worn, paisley couch, staring blankly at the wall, the relentless Cincinnati winter rain outside mirroring the desolate landscape of his soul, the sheer, crushing weight of the injustice finally breaking his will to fight. The thought of the executor's power and the sheer impossibility of fighting a clandestine network with unlimited legal and financial resources overwhelmed him, the $250,000 lawsuit and the $12,000 credit card debt now seemed like insurmountable mountains, and his will to survive, let alone fight, began to bleed out. The darkest moment arrived late on a Tuesday night. He found himself standing in the center of the apartment, a worn, heavy baseball bat in his hand. An old, cherished gift from his father. The initial thought of physically destroying his meager possessions, a desperate, impotent scream of rage, transforming into the chilling, quiet contemplation of simply ending the agonizing struggle, a complete emotional breakdown fueled by exhaustion, grief, and the bitter taste of utter failure. He dropped the bat, the loud thud echoing unnaturally in the stillness, and collapsed onto his knees, letting out a raw, guttural sob that was 6 years of suppressed grief and recent terror finally erupting. A broken, defeated man who had been stripped of his purpose. The silence that followed was complete, a horrifying void, and he felt the profound, cold certainty of being completely alone against the world, realizing that without Chloe, he had no reason left to breathe. Little did he know that even in this deep well of despair, the faint echo of a promise he had made to his late wife, Lisa, was still vibrating, a small, stubborn seed of resilience that refused to die, and a distant, unseen force was already moving, activated by his collapse, preparing a lifeline he desperately needed. Just as the cold hand of despair was about to fully crush him, a small, completely unexpected gesture cut through the darkness, an act of pure, unsolicited kindness that felt like a miraculous ray of sunshine in the endless Ohio winter. rekindling a minuscule, fragile spark of hope that allowed Ethan to grasp a lifeline of strange, new information. The gesture came from Mrs. Hernandez, 60s, a kind but perpetually worried-looking woman, his next-door neighbor in the Oakley apartment building, who, noticing Ethan's drawn, haunted appearance and the unusual, unbroken silence from his unit, quietly knocked on his door. She didn't offer platitudes or questions, but simply handed him a warm, heavy container of her homemade chili, a simple, nourishing act of grace that spoke volumes, along with a tightly folded, slightly crumpled piece of paper that she insisted had been slipped under his door earlier by a lady who looked like she meant business. The physical warmth of the chili in his hands was the first tangible comfort he had felt in days, a grounding sensation that pulled him back from the emotional precipice and the simple human connection. A neighbor's quiet belief in his decency was a balm to his shattered spirit. The note, written on expensive, watermarked paper and folded precisely, contained no sender's name, only a single, cryptic, typewritten message. The executor's weakness is the Delaware shell. Look for Talon. They both fear the initial. You have 48 hours. RV, followed by a series of coordinates. $39 carat / circ 8 feet, 29.5 inches. N, 84 carat / circ 31 feet, 24.3 inches. W, coordinates for a specific, seemingly random address in the Hyde Park area of Cincinnati. This strange information was a jarring mix of corporate jargon, code words, and a specific geographical location, hinting at a financial conspiracy far deeper than a personal vendetta, and the specificity of the information, Delaware shell, a legal term for a corporate facade, instantly engaged the practical, resourceful part of Ethan's mind that his grief had momentarily suppressed. He realized RV likely stood for Eleanor Vance, his mysterious legal savior, and that despite his despair, someone on the outside was still fighting for him, a revelation that gave his fractured reality a sudden, urgent purpose. He had to investigate the coordinates and find out what Talon was before the 48-hour deadline expired. But he had no idea this first step into the world of corporate espionage would lead him directly to a high-security vault in downtown Cincinnati, a place where a small, unassuming file held the true million-dollar secret connecting the executor to the highest echelons of power. Fueled by Mrs. Hernandez's chili and the cryptic message, Ethan's weary mind, now fully engaged in survival mode, began to meticulously retrace the chain of events, applying the sharp, analytical precision he used in the factory to the chaos of his life, leading to the inescapable, chilling suspicion that nothing that had happened to him, from the date with Sarah to his termination and the CPS seizure, was accidental, but rather a carefully orchestrated, high-stakes trap. The sheer coincidence of Sarah's presence, the immediate, overwhelming nature of her need, and the specific timing of the executor's threat all pointed to a scenario where Ethan had been deliberately chosen, not randomly encountered, a realization that turned his self-pity into cold, focused rage. He remembered the specific, detailed information the executor had about his daughter, Chloe, and his job, Midwest Auto Parts, details that a stranger wouldn't possess, and concluded that he had been under intense surveillance for weeks, perhaps even months, leading up to the initial date, a calculated infiltration of his safe space. The $250,000 fraudulent lawsuit, which seemed excessively harsh for a man with no assets, now appeared to be a precise legal maneuver, a scorched earth strategy to ensure he was neutralized as a viable parental figure before the real objective, Sarah and the locket, was secured, preventing him from ever mounting a credible legal challenge against the executor. He scrutinized the bizarre coordinates provided by Eleanor Vance, cross-referencing them with public records, and discovered the address belonged to a high-end, heavily secured corporate service provider that specialized in establishing anonymous Delaware LLCs and shell corporations, a direct, undeniable link to the Delaware shell mentioned in the note, confirming his suspicion that this entire drama was rooted not in emotion, but in cold, hard, organized crime and corporate fraud. The final piece of the chilling puzzle was the realization that Sarah's initial, tearful story of a broken-down car and eviction notice, while seemingly genuine, was the perfect bait, a story designed to appeal directly to the specific, empathetic weaknesses of a kind-hearted, single father who understood hardship, a psychological trap engineered to pull him into the conflict. Little did he know that his suspicion was correct. Sarah had been instructed to find a single father with a clean record and a strong moral compass, the perfect, unsuspecting legal shield against a sophisticated tracking system, and the entire encounter had been a premeditated, complex insertion operation that turned his life into a collateral casualty. Acting on the coordinates, Ethan found himself in the sterile, imposing lobby of the corporate service building in Hyde Park, feeling profoundly out of place among the suited executives, and through a risky, desperate act of bluffing and a carefully placed, vague mention of the Delaware shell, he managed to slip past the security desk and access a secluded, rarely used digital archive room. It was here, on a dusty, older server, that the great lie was definitively revealed, a truth so profound and shocking that it forced Ethan to reevaluate every single interaction he had with Sarah, transforming his memory of their short time together from a story of rescue to a deep, gut-wrenching betrayal. He found a high-security, password-protected file labeled Project Talon Asset 03, and after a series of frantic, desperate guesses, he used the initials on Sarah's locket, DR, as the password, which immediately opened the file and spilled forth a devastating, documented history that shattered his perception of her. The file revealed that Sarah was not a victim of a sudden, desperate circumstance, but a highly trained, deeply embedded former operative for a powerful, international private intelligence firm, the very Talon mentioned in the note, that specialized in corporate espionage and asset recovery, and that her real name was Daniela Rossi, not Sarah. The most devastating revelation was a clear, chilling transcript of a recorded conversation between Daniela, Sarah, and an unknown handler 6 weeks before their first date, where she explicitly discussed the target profile: a stable, financially distressed single father with no criminal record and a deep well of empathy, confirming that Ethan had been meticulously selected and targeted as an unwitting shield to conceal their location from the executor, who was revealed in the same document to be her former, much more ruthless partner and the true father of the 3 children. The betrayal was crushing. Every tear, every shared story, every moment of vulnerability he had believed was real was now poisoned by the stark, undeniable evidence of her manipulation, making her the active architect of his financial ruin and the unjust removal of his daughter. The great lie was not just her identity, but the pretense of genuine connection, a calculated performance that had been executed with ruthless, professional perfection. Little did he know that the file also contained a secondary, hidden partition, a digital will left by Daniela's late mentor, detailing the true location of the multimillion-dollar asset, a cutting-edge energy patent, which was secretly embedded in the core of the silver locket, a truth she had been protecting, even from the executor. But the discovery had already inflicted a wound of emotional destruction deeper than any physical attack. The discovery of the Talon file and Daniela's, Sarah's, professional betrayal was the final, strongest emotional blow, the one that completely unmoored Ethan, sending him into a complete, isolated freefall, where the physical solitude of his life was finally matched by an overwhelming, absolute emotional aloneness. The realization that his kindness had been weaponized against him, that his love for his daughter had been factored into a mercenary equation, left a cold, empty void in his chest, a profound sense of humiliation and self-loathing that exceeded the pain of losing Chloe, because the loss of trust was a deeper, more fundamental rupture. He returned to his silent, cold apartment, the gravity of his total isolation settling over him with suffocating weight. His daughter was gone, his job was gone, his money was gone, his home was threatened, and the one person he had risked everything for, the one person who had briefly offered the possibility of a shared future, was a masterful liar who had meticulously plotted his downfall. He spent the entire night tearing apart the small room where Daniela and the children had slept, an uncontrollable, silent rage compelling him to rip down the blankets and throw out the few remaining, cheap toys, a desperate attempt to purge the physical remnants of the lie from his sanctuary, the symbolic violence doing little to alleviate the deep, agonizing pain of his wounded pride and broken faith in humanity. In the middle of the night, driven by a desperate, fleeting hope, he tried to call Eleanor Vance on the untraceable number, but the phone rang once and went straight to a generic, unhelpful voicemail, confirming the final, terrifying piece of the puzzle. The woman who had momentarily saved him was now gone, having completed her mysterious objective, and Ethan was truly and completely alone, exhausted warrior facing an invisible army, legally and financially neutered, emotionally devastated, and now knowing with chilling certainty that there was no benevolent force, no hidden ally watching over him. His life had become a singular, terrifying point of vulnerability, and the complete lack of any outside support left him with a terrifying clarity. If he was going to survive and get Chloe back, he could only rely on the cold, hard logic of the Talon file and the painful lesson of Daniela's betrayal and the absolute solitude of his defeat. A subtle, profound change began to take root in Ethan, a silent, internal hardening driven not by hope, but by a cold, relentless desire for justice and the desperate need to reclaim his daughter, a transformation from a reactive victim to a focused, strategic player. The overwhelming emotional collapse had purged the last vestiges of his old, passive self, the man who allowed grief to dictate his life, and what emerged was a stripped-down, analytical, and ruthlessly determined individual, his empathy replaced by a steely, almost frightening clarity. He stopped staring at the wall and started looking at the Talon file again, not through the lens of betrayal, but as a blueprint for a counterattack, realizing that the file contained not just lies, but strategic, high-value information about his enemy, the executor. He began working in complete, monastic silence, transforming his living room into a crude command center, utilizing the public library's computers since his internet access was cut off by the asset freeze, systematically analyzing the legal documents, the financial shell company names, and the cryptic terms like the initial mentioned in Eleanor Vance's note. The first silent change was in his habits. He began running 4 miles every morning before dawn, pushing his body to the point of exhaustion, the physical pain a necessary distraction from the emotional agony, his physical appearance slowly transforming from weary to lean and coiled, a predator's energy replacing a victim's slump. The key breakthrough came in the form of the initial. A small, barely legible footnote in the Talon file mentioned a high-security vault in downtown Cleveland, requiring a 2-part key. The first key was a physical piece of jewelry, the locket, and the second was a 7-digit numerical code, which, through relentless cross-referencing with Daniela's encrypted contact list, he realized was the birthday of her 3 children combined with the month of her mentor's death. This silent, intellectual victory gave him a concrete, actionable target, a path to the very asset the executor was hunting, proving that the key to his revenge and Chloe's return lay in leveraging the intelligence Daniela had left behind. Little did he know that his sudden, focused activity was, in fact, being monitored from a distance, and this newfound determination was exactly what a powerful, unseen ally had been waiting for before making their next, decisive move. Just as Ethan was finalizing his desperate, high-risk plan to travel to Cleveland and physically acquire the asset, the energy patent, before the executor could, a dramatic and completely unexpected element was reintroduced into his life, not as a threat, but as a genuine, powerful ally, one whose existence dragged a painful, long-buried secret from his own past back to the surface. The ally arrived in the form of Eleanor Vance, who reappeared as abruptly as she had vanished, showing up on his doorstep on a cold Friday afternoon. Not in a power suit, but in a pair of jeans and a simple leather jacket, a sudden shift in her presentation that signaled a profound change in the game. She didn't offer apologies for her previous silence, but handed him a legal envelope containing a court order, a temporary, 60-day lift on the financial asset freeze and a full dismissal of the $250,000 fraudulent lawsuit, both achieved by a single, brilliantly executed legal maneuver in a distant Nevada court, restoring his financial liquidity and legal standing overnight. Eleanor revealed the shocking truth. She was not merely a lawyer, but a deep-cover agent for a covert government agency specializing in high-level corporate crime, and she was not hired by Sarah/Daniela, but by a figure from Ethan's own past, his late wife, Lisa's estranged and incredibly wealthy older sister, Vivian Stone, a highly successful tech CEO in Silicon Valley whom Ethan hadn't spoken to since Lisa's funeral 6 years prior due to an unresolved, agonizing family feud over Lisa's sudden death. The past returned to the surface with a vengeance. Eleanor explained that Lisa, before her death, had entrusted Vivian with a substantial legacy fund for Chloe, along with a complex, sealed envelope detailing her profound fear of an individual named The Initial, whom she believed was responsible for sabotaging the company she worked for and was now after her family. Vivian, seeing the severity of the executor's attack on Ethan and Chloe, and recognizing the chilling connection to Lisa's old fears, had activated Eleanor to secretly protect her family and the hidden asset, which was somehow tied to Lisa's work. Ethan was floored. His wife's sister, the one he had publicly shunned and privately resented, had been his silent, powerful protector all along, and the knowledge that Lisa's fear was justified and that her death might not have been an accident provided a stunning, terrible new context to his entire ordeal. This unexpected new ally, operating with the resources of a major corporation and the backing of a shadowy government agency, had just given Ethan the operational security and the financial means he needed, transforming his personal vendetta into a fully funded, high-stakes mission. And little did he know that Vivian Stone was about to arrive in Cincinnati herself, ready to personally confront the man who had tormented her family for years, with the support of Eleanor Vance, now acting as his operational liaison and legal strategist, and the formidable, silent backing of Vivian Stone. Ethan was immediately put to the ultimate test of his newfound focus and resilience. A high-stakes, direct confrontation with the executor in a location of the enemy's choosing, a dangerous gamble designed to force a negotiation for Chloe's immediate return. The test was simple and terrifying. The executor, whose real name was revealed to be Marcus Thorne, a former military intelligence officer turned corporate mercenary, sent an anonymous, encrypted text message containing only two details. The exchange: Coney Island Amusement Park. Midnight. Bring the locket or say goodbye. Coney Island was a massive, sprawling, dimly lit, and mostly deserted park on the banks of the Ohio River during the off-season, a perfect, neutral but dangerous location for a clandestine meeting. Eleanor provided Ethan with sophisticated, last-minute intelligence. A single, high-tech tracking device disguised as a lapel pin, a secure communication line, and one critical instruction: do not give him the locket, use the information you found to leverage the exchange. Ethan was terrified but resolute, the image of Chloe's tear-stained face overriding all fear. He arrived at the deserted park at 11:50 p.m., the silence broken only by the cold wind whipping off the river and the ominous creak of the empty Ferris wheel, a terrifying, silent witness to the illegal exchange. The test intensified when Marcus Thorne, the executor, appeared from the shadows, flanked by two imposing, silent security men, holding a nervous, clearly sedated Chloe by the hand, the chilling sight of his daughter immediately cutting through Ethan's composure. Thorne, looking impeccable in a dark overcoat, did not waste time, his voice a low, gravelly threat. The locket for the girl now, Miller. End this. The true test was in Ethan's response. Instead of succumbing to his fatherly instinct to immediately hand over the locket, Ethan remembered Eleanor's warning and the Talon file, leveraging his single piece of recovered intelligence. He didn't produce the locket, but instead, he uttered the cryptic phrase he knew Thorne feared most. I know about the initials contingency plan in Cleveland, Marcus. The one your boss won't authorize. You don't want the locket, you want the decryption key. Let her go now or the key goes public. A calculated, dangerous bluff that hit Thorne like a physical blow, his controlled demeanor instantly fracturing into raw, calculating fury. This proved that Ethan had learned to fight with the enemy's weapons, information and leverage, and the immediate, terrifying shift in Thorne's eyes confirmed he had passed the test. But little did he know that Thorne's unexpected hesitation was a planned delay, designed to allow a second, more dangerous team to flank Ethan and steal the locket by force. Ethan's calculated, terrifying bluff worked, forcing Marcus Thorne, the executor, into an immediate, furious retreat. The mention of the initials contingency plan and the decryption key hit a nerve so raw that Thorne immediately released Chloe, abandoning the immediate attempt to seize the locket, his mission now compromised and his fear of his unknown superiors taking precedence over the asset. The first great reward was the immediate, emotional victory. The sight of Chloe running into his arms, burying her face into his coat and sobbing the raw, uncomplicated relief of a child reunited with her father, a moment of pure, unsullied joy that instantly dissolved the last vestiges of Ethan's despair, healing a part of his soul that had been dead for 6 years. The reward was not just emotional. As Thorne was making his hasty, frustrated exit, he threw a small, black, encrypted USB drive onto the concrete, a final, spiteful gesture, roaring, "Take your consolation prize, Miller. She's not worth the risk." This consolation prize turned out to be the key to the second, stunning wave of truths that began to surface immediately. Back at his apartment, with Eleanor Vance providing the decryption expertise, they accessed the drive, which contained a detailed digital ledger and a series of recorded confessions from Thorne. The truths began to surface with shocking clarity. The executor's main objective was not the locket itself, but the energy patent it unlocked, a $500 million technology stolen from his former boss, Vincent Sterling, the true identity of the Initial, a notoriously ruthless tech billionaire. And Thorne had orchestrated the entire operation, including the hiring of Sarah/Daniela, to recover the patent for a massive secret payout. The most personal and devastating truth was revealed in one of Thorne's desperate, drunken recordings. The accident that killed Ethan's wife, Lisa, 6 years ago was not an accident at all, but a deliberate act of industrial sabotage ordered by Vincent Sterling, the Initial, to silence Lisa, who was one of his top R&D scientists and had discovered the stolen nature of the energy patent Thorne was now trying to recover. Ethan's world tilted. His wife had been murdered, and his entire life, his financial ruin, and his daughter's temporary removal were all collateral damage in a years-long, multi-million-dollar corporate conspiracy that started with his wife's tragic, final, noble act of defiance. Little did he know that the emotional high of having Chloe back and the revelation of his wife's murder had just set the stage for the ultimate confrontation, because Vincent Sterling, the true villain, was about to emerge from the shadows. The complete truth about the mysterious person who had been orchestrating Ethan's protection and funding Eleanor Vance's legal maneuvers was finally, fully revealed, a revelation that not only justified his wife's past actions, but also provided the final, powerful piece of the puzzle necessary to secure his total victory. The mysterious person was indeed Vivian Stone, Ethan's sister-in-law and Lisa's estranged sister, but the full depth of her involvement was far greater than mere family loyalty. Eleanor explained that Vivian, the Silicon Valley CEO, was the one who had secretly funded the creation of the energy patent that Thorne was trying to recover, a technology that Lisa had been working on with her before joining Vincent Sterling's company, a patent designed to offer cheap, clean energy to developing nations, a project Sterling wanted to bury to protect his own fossil fuel interests. The final revelation was that Vivian was the Initial, not the villainous The Initial Sterling, but a code name referring to the initial investor in the patent, and she had allowed Ethan to believe the villain was the Initial to force him to look for the decryption key and retrieve the patent himself, keeping her identity secret to protect him from Sterling's direct attack and to maintain plausible deniability with the government agency. This meant that the locket held not only the decryption key to the stolen patent but also a digital deadman switch programmed by Lisa to transfer all rights to Vivian upon her death, a final act of justice. Vivian suddenly appeared in the apartment, flown in on a private jet, her presence radiating authority and quiet grief, and she revealed the emotional truth. The feud between her and Ethan was a facade, a necessary lie after Lisa's death to keep Sterling from connecting her to the family and the patent, a sacrifice she made to protect Chloe's inheritance. Vivian's real identity as the true Initial meant that she was not just an ally, but the rightful owner of the asset that had caused all the chaos, and she was now ready to deploy her considerable resources, hundreds of millions of dollars and a highly placed government contact, to destroy Vincent Sterling and secure justice for Lisa. Little did Ethan know that the final test, the one that would determine his and Chloe's future, was about to take place in the very courtroom where he was publicly humiliated, a final legal showdown against the very man who killed his wife. With Chloe safe, the full truth exposed, and Vivian Stone's unparalleled resources now publicly committed, Ethan had to face the last, most terrifying trial before his total victory. A formal, high-stakes custody hearing in the Cincinnati family court, where Vincent Sterling, the Initial, the actual orchestrator of Lisa's murder, had filed a last-minute, frivolous, but legally dangerous petition, attempting to use the fabricated CPS reports and Ethan's temporary destitution to seize custody of Chloe, intending to use the girl as leverage to force Vivian and Ethan to surrender the energy patent. This wasn't about money. It was a final act of pure malice by a narcissist who couldn't stand to lose. The trial was brutal. Sterling's team, a group of expensive, relentless Manhattan lawyers, paraded the original CPS agents and the callous former boss from Midwest Auto Parts, Frank Donnelly, to the witness stand, painting Ethan as an unstable, financially bankrupt, and potentially delusional father who was unfit to raise a child. the same public humiliation from the school now being used as formal, damning evidence. Ethan felt the old pang of unjust humiliation, but this time, he was not alone. Eleanor Vance, now operating openly and with full legal authority, mounted a brilliant defense, first by completely dismantling the fabricated evidence, using the Thorn USB drive to expose Frank Donnelly's lies and the CPS tip-off as a calculated act of corporate conspiracy. The ultimate turning point came when Vivian Stone took the stand, radiating quiet power, and presented the court with irrefutable proof of Sterling's involvement in Lisa's murder, a set of digital fingerprints from the USB, and, more importantly, a document legally establishing a $50 million irrevocable trust fund for Chloe, ensuring her financial future was secure, a move that nullified Sterling's central argument of financial instability. The trial became a public spectacle of justice. Ethan, taking the stand, didn't argue law, but spoke from the heart, his voice raw with 6 years of grief and recent terror, detailing the sacrifices he made for his daughter and reading a final, heartbreaking letter Lisa had left him, a testament to his unconditional love and worthiness as a father. This powerful, emotional testimony, backed by Vivian's legal and financial muscle, was the final, devastating blow. Little did he know that the judge, a respected local figure with a deep sense of community, was about to deliver a verdict that would not only restore his life but also set the stage for Vincent Sterling's immediate, irreversible downfall. The courtroom, packed with reporters drawn by the sensational headlines of tech billionaires, stolen patents, and corporate murder, fell into a profound silence as Judge Thompson, 60s, a stern but fair figure, read the final verdict, a moment that simultaneously served complete justice and delivered the ultimate emotional victory Ethan and his family deserved. The judge didn't simply dismiss the case. He ruled that Vincent Sterling's petition was a malicious, fraudulent abuse of the legal system, designed to exert undue influence and emotional distress, and he permanently dismissed the case, awarding full sole custody of Chloe back to a tearful, profoundly relieved Ethan, a victory that was met with a spontaneous, collective gasp of relief and a scattering of applause in the courtroom. Justice was swiftly and completely served when, immediately following the judge's ruling, a team of FBI agents, activated by Eleanor Vance's covert agency and the evidence of corporate conspiracy and murder from the Thorn USB, arrested Vincent Sterling right in the courtroom, the man's face contorted in a mixture of disbelief and impotent rage as he was led away in handcuffs, the televised spectacle of the ruthless billionaire's public downfall becoming the defining image of the day. The true emotional victory came as Ethan held Chloe tightly, the full, crushing weight of the past 6 years. The grief, the debt, the fear, the betrayal lifting from his shoulders, replaced by the profound, simple, and overwhelming joy of having his family whole and safe. Vivian, standing beside them, finalized the victory by publicly announcing the formation of the Lisa Miller Clean Energy Foundation, seating it with the recovered $500 million patent and naming Ethan as the co-chair, a final, beautiful vindication of his wife's life's work. The closing image is one of profound, quiet contentment. Ethan, standing on the porch of his now paid-off, restored Oakley home, watching Chloe and Vivian laughing together while planting a small, memorial rose bush in the front yard, the symbolic act representing new growth from old pain. His simple, honest life not only reclaimed but elevated far beyond his wildest dreams. He was no longer the exhausted single father, but a man who had faced down powerful evil, protected the innocent, and won. His life forever defined by the ultimate lesson that true wealth lies not in money, but in integrity and the fierce, unyielding love for his daughter. A simple man who had risked everything and, in doing so, gained the world, his story a testament to the powerful, life-altering truth that even in the darkest injustice, compassion and truth will ultimately prevail, transforming his simple act of kindness into a legacy of hope. If this roller coaster of injustice, unexpected sacrifice, and ultimate redemption with Ethan and Chloe gripped you, don't let the story end here. We specialize in bringing you these deep-dive dramas, tales of single dads against the world, mind-blowing millionaire twists, and the fight for justice. Tap that big red subscribe button right now and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next intense, emotional saga we meticulously craft for maximum retention and impact. And now, tell us in the comments below, What part of Ethan's journey, the devastating betrayal by Sarah, his confrontation with the executor, or the ultimate reveal of Vivian Stone, shocked you the most? Do you think Ethan made the right choice to trust Eleanor Vance?